Now we're looking at the formulation of financial accounting theories. Now in the formulation of accounting theories, we are looking at how do you come up with accounting theories. So in the formulation of accounting theories, we look at the types. In the types, there are two types of financial accounting theories. One, normative, which is also called deductive. The number two is called descriptive, which is also called inductive approach. In the normative, we look at the meaning, what is normative, then the methods of formulation, how do you come up with normative approach or theory. Then number two is descriptive, we look at the meaning, what's all about descriptive theory, and then we look at the methods of formulation. So these are the critical components of formulation of accounting theories. Other books call it methodology. So we are looking at methodology. Now in methodology, we look at the approaches. How do you come up with a theory? Normative. Now what do you mean by normative? It is the deductive approach, begins with proposition and assumption, and finally ends with logical conclusion about subject under consideration. So it is very critical and interesting to know that in normative theory, we are doing what we call deductive approach. So deductive means we start from the theory and we end with the final and logical conclusion. It helps in developing new accounting practice, keeping pace with the dynamic world. It stresses on what ought to be done. So normative theory or normative approach or deductive approach will always stress what ought to be done. In other words, give a prescription. It suggests what an accountant should do rather than explaining what he does. It aims towards full disclosure of the information to the users to safeguard their interest in the firm. Example. So which are these examples of normative approach? So which are these information or theories which have been formed through the normative approach? We have inflation accounting theory, environment accounting, social responsibility accounting, human resource accounting. So these are the examples of the accounts which have been formed due to the deductive approach or normative approach. So we have inflation accounting because of normative. So why do we need this? It helps in developing new accounting techniques, keeping pace with the fast changing world. So we need to know that account has been evolving, and as it evolves, one thought leads to another thought. One idea leads to another idea. So we need to have a lot of research, a lot of development, which will help us create a new field of operation. So the following are the steps to be followed in the determination of normative, using normative approach or deductive approach. Number one, determine the objective of preparing financial statement. So number one thing you need to do is that identify your objectives. What are your objectives? In other words, the theories that will help you, guide you. Number two, state the assumption or postulates are made. So you need to give the assumption. What will be your assumption? What will be your driving force? Number three, new principles are stated on the basis of those postulates. So using the assumptions that you have created, using the hypothesis that you have developed, then you get the now principles that you want to develop. Then determine the new accounting technique from the principle. So finally, once you get the principle, then you determine the new accounting technique. So that brings us to the formation of accounting, different accountings, like responsible accounting, like human resource accounting. These are the procedures which were used. They first set the objectives for the financial statement, then state the assumption or postulates. Then finally, new principles are stated on the basis of those postulates. Like when you talk about principles like double entry rule, business entity. So these are principles that you need to go up. Now the merits of this normative approach or theory: compatible with changing circumstances. So it is compatible with changing circumstances. Number two, useful in building up new models. So it is very important model in building new models. Setback. What is the setback or the demerit of this formula? It's not simple. It's not simple to come up with this system. It's not easy. It's a complex formula. Has loopholes. Wrong assumptions, postulates, and proposition may give misleading conclusion. So if they make wrong assumptions, at the end we get wrong and misleading conclusions. Not free from biasness. Personal judgment, individual judgment can cause a problem. Descriptive approach. Now, descriptive approach is also called positive approach. Now, when you talk about positive approach, we are looking at it is an inductive approach. It is an inductive approach. Useful in framing general rules, principles, laws of social and physical science, and to study the trend of human behavior. So, descriptive, in other words, inductive, we start with the observation. Remember, in romantic, we use the logics, but in descriptive, observation is the critical component. And in our study, we are looking at the general rules, principles, laws of social and physical science, and to study the trend of human behaviors. Analyze the existing accounting practice. So there is analysis of the existing practice, which will give us prediction and explanation. The theory justifies the existing practice of accountants and explain how accounting information are collected, analyzed, and communicated to others. Determine the probability of discontinuing any existing accounting practice. So at the end, we'll be able to make conclusion whether to continue particular practice in accounts. Example of this are one, consistency concepts, historical cost, conservatism, business entity. So these are the products of descriptive approach or inductive approach. So when you talk about the principles, they come out of inductive approach in accounts, and this is the foundation. Principle will always guide us in doing the right thing in the right place with the right attitude. So why is it important to do this? The need justifies practice of accountants and suggests for betterment of the practice. So descriptive approach will always justify why we need accountants and how to better the practice of accountancy. It is a practical approach and simple and easy to understand. So this approach is very easy to understand. Now have this in mind. You need to be very careful Now, these are the processes of coming up with a descriptive or positive or inductive approach. Analysis, what accountants do in practice. So we are looking at what are the accountants doing in practice. In other words, we are using observation to find out what accountants are doing in practice. Number 2, hypothesis. Set the hypothesis. So number 2 is to set the hypothesis why the accountants are doing what they are doing. Then number 3, testing. Test the hypothesis. So you test the hypothesis. Now once you've done the testing of the hypothesis, then the results will be you either reject or accept. If you reject, it means it is under particular significance. So we say reject meaning it is true. Accept meaning, reject meaning it is against the null hypothesis. Accept meaning it's according to null hypothesis. Let me say this. Hypothesis, when you're setting your hypothesis, you have only two hypotheses. We have what you call null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. So when you're setting your hypothesis, you approach it from the null hypothesis. Null hypothesis, meaning that you say the negative part of it. Distinction. What is the difference between inductive approach and deductive approach? 1. Necessity. Why is it necessary? Used for justifying the existing practice. So inductive approach is used for justifying the existing practice, whereas in deductive approach, guide the new accounting practice. Number 2, basis. What are the bases? Depend on what accountants do. So we depend on what accountants are doing. But when you come to deductive, what should be done in practice? What should be done? Use deriving descriptive theory. So when you use inductive approach, you will come up with descriptive theory. Deriving normative theory. When you use deductive approach, you will actually derive into normative theory. Dynamic, not dynamic. So inductive approach is not dynamic, but when you come to deductive, it's very dynamic. Example. Which are these examples? Example of inductive approach, we have historical cause, entity, business entity, we have consistency, we have duality. These are the examples, the principles, and the conceptions. Now when you come to deductive, we have inflation, social responsibility account, human resource account, etc. So these are the accounts which have been brought forth due to deductive approach. The financial reporting environment. We look at that in our next table of discussion. Thank you for being informed.